So what are we getting here? Kyle Tucker, I think we've been banging the drum here in Chicago that the Cubs don't have a superstar player. They don't even have a star player. They have a bunch of good-ish players to good players, no great players. Can we call Kyle Tucker a star or superstar?
Yes, 100%. He got his problem in Houston, and that's not even a problem. He was kind of a victim of the Astros' own success, right? Like he came into a clubhouse that had Jose Altuve, Alex Bregman, at the time, Carlos Correa, Yordan Alvarez, Justin Verlander. Like he was like seventh or eighth on the list of like notable Astros in there, but I mean, he's a quiet guy and he's underappreciated a lot around the league. But I mean, his numbers, he is every bit of a superstar. The way he produces, he's a true five-tool player. Was, I believe, one home run away from a 30-30 season in 2023. He was well on his way to a 30-30 season if he didn't fracture his shin last year after fouling a ball off of himself. I mean, he can run, he can hit. He's a great base runner, great base stealer. The thing about him that you kind of know he's a good guy is like the speed. Like if you look at his sprint speed, it's not like some elite sprint speed. He just has great instincts on the base paths, knows exactly when to steal, knows exactly who he can take advantage of pitcher wise, opposing pitchers. Hits lefties exceptionally well. Him and Yordan Alvarez, probably the two best left on left hitters in all of baseball. There's nothing that he can't do on the field. I mean, he's won a Gold Glove a couple of years ago, was a finalist the last couple of years. Truly a five-tool player that I really don't think until about 72 or 96 hours ago, I think a lot of people inside baseball, like, agents and scouts and rival teams and other players, they knew how good Kyle Tucker was. I don't think the baseball world, like fans in the outside world, I don't think they really grasped how good Kyle Tucker was until he got traded, until the last, 72, 96 hours.
Yeah, I think, clearly on our show, I underappreciated his defense on Friday when we did our podcast, but that's a different story. I'm curious from your perspective, like, it was a surprise when those rumors started during the week at winter meetings that the Cubs were in on Kyle Tucker. But like from the Astros perspective, like you said, he's every bit a star or even a superstar of a player. Why did the Astros trade a guy like that to the Cubs? Like, why was now the time that they looked to trade him?
Well, they're at a crossroads. They have a terrible farm system. Cam Smith is now automatically Cam Smith was like the seventh best prospect in the Cubs system. He is now unanimously, without any shadow of a doubt, the best prospect in the Astros farm system. Wow. So yeah. They had a pretty bad farm system. They've got a bloated payroll that is a byproduct of a lot of bad contracts, a lot of bad extensions. And they've got an owner in Jim Crane who spends money. Like, let's get that out of the way. He's not cheap. This is not a situation where he's frugal. He carried the fourth highest payroll in baseball last year. However, he has had a long-standing aversion to giving out anything beyond 6 years. And the most he's guaranteed a player in his ownership tenure is $151 million. I can tell you that they had discussed trading Kyle Tucker before they got to the winter meetings. I think they were still kind of iffy as to whether they were going to pull the trigger. But once they got to the winter meetings and they saw that Juan Soto got the deal that he got, and you start to look at Kyle Tucker's WAR, you start to look at every metric that has him very close to Soto. He's not Soto, but every production metric has him very close to Soto. You got to start to get the feeling that, all right, if Juan Soto got this money, Kyle Tucker's not going to get $700 million, but he'll get 400. He'll get in the $400 million range in free agency. And the Astros just were not going to be in that ballpark. Now, they've had this situation before with Correa and Springer and Cole and Bregman last year, and they opted to just not trade them. They opted to play it out with their final year club control, get a comp draft, attach a qualifying offer to them, get a comp draft pick, and be good with it. The state of their farm system kind of where they were with their championship window, their major league roster, they couldn't afford to keep doing that, especially if Jim Crane is not going to budge on his aversion to long-term deals. Now, it's worked out pretty well for them. They've gone to the playoffs 8 straight years, and they've been in the ALCS 7 of those 8 years. So to act like Jim Crane is doing something that is like inhibiting the franchise is not true. But you do have to wonder how much longer he can kind of proceed with this, given where the markets for all these guys are going, where the contracts are going. He may have to budge a little bit, and right now he's not willing to. And Kyle Tucker's a Cub.
There you go.
I guess I have 2 questions here. Chandler, did the Astros and Tucker ever sit down and actually discuss a contract extension over the course of his time with the Astros?
Yes, they did. So the Astros extended Yordan Alvarez 2 years ago in 2022. They gave him 6 years, $115 million, which is highway robbery. It's maybe the best, most team-friendly deal in baseball. At that same time, they approached Kyle Tucker. They tried to get both of them done in that time frame. I'm unsure what they offered. But if it was close to the Alvarez, if it was the same kind of numbers as the Alvarez, I understand why they turned it down. They did not. That was the only legitimate extension talks that they had with Kyle Tucker. They took him to arbitration last winter, which is always a weird thing to do for a team that if you really want to keep a guy, and they beat him in arbitration. And Kyle Tucker, as you'll soon meet him, he's not the most emotional person. He doesn't really have a visceral reaction to much of anything. But he talked after, and you could tell that he was a little bit peeved. I don't think that impacted this, but those arbitration hearings are never end well for the people that go. Just even if it's cordial, even if people understand it's a business, it's tough to hear the team that employs you say, well, here's why we think you should make less money. Here's why we think you stink. Not stink is a relative term, but still. And then, there is something else, as I'm sure you guys have looked into this saga this season of he missed 80 games what the Astros kept maintaining was a shin bruise. He actually fractured his shin, and it was something that it really off-put Tucker's camp to the point where, Kyle Tucker had to come out and say, like, guys, I actually fractured my shin. And the Astros just refused to budge on calling this a shin contusion. And there was some thought of, man, this is making him look soft, that a guy's missing 3.5 months with a bone bruise in his shin. So that didn't endear the Astros to Tucker very well. But again, they did not trade Kyle Tucker because they refused to acknowledge he had a fractured shin. They did not trade Kyle Tucker because they beat him in arbitration once. They traded Kyle Tucker because they needed to replenish their farm system. They needed to clear some payroll space, and they were at an inflection point, and they had to act.
Okay. Well, then going off everything you just said, it feels like, I wouldn't say there was a ton of bad blood, but seems like they probably knew that not only were they not going to try, but maybe he didn't even want to be there. Like, I'm perhaps putting words in your mouth here, but I'm trying to come to a trying to find an avenue of where maybe the Cubs and him could reach to an extension in season. Because I think it could happen if A, the Cubs are good, B, he likes, he's sold on Wrigley and the experience and all of that, those things. He's not a Scott Boras client. So to me, I do in general think it could be possible. I think that the odds are not very good in my favor of that actually happening. But do you think that they were ever close to an extension beforehand or at all? Do you think, am I close on this possible like bad blood with the injury stuff and going to arbitration, all of that? I'm saying a lot. I'll shut up.
Look, that's why I wanted to be careful with how I talked about that. Like, I don't think there was bad blood. Like, I don't think Kyle Tucker resented the Astros. I just think there were a couple things that, just in general, like the business of baseball were just a little bit off-putting. I think he loved Houston. He loved the clubhouse he was in. He met Michael Brantley in Houston. Michael Brantley's now one of his best friends. They really bonded. Michael Brantley really taught him how to be a big leaguer, taught him how to get a routine down, things like that. So, I mean, I think I think Kyle Tucker would have entertained an extension in Houston, but again, they just were the Astros were never going to get to that point. They were never going to pay him his market value or what his production said he was worth. And as of right now, unless the Cubs throw $450-500 million at him in the middle of the season, like he'd be foolish to take an extension right now. Because he's going to go to free agency next winter, and like we just talked about, he's going to command $400 to $450 to $500 million. Like, unless the Cubs throw that money at him in the middle of the season, and unless he just falls in love with Wrigleyville and everything about playing there and playing in Chicago, then I think it'd be kind of dumb for Tucker or his guys at Excel or anyone to legitimately entertain extension talks this season, because again, he's going to go into free agency next year. He'll have his pick of teams, and that's not to say he's not going to like the Cubs. Maybe he loves the Cubs, but I think players love to see what's out there. Players love to see what their market is, and they love to be kind of recruited. They love to be kind of wined and dined, things like that. I mean, Kyle Tucker's never had that chance. The Astros drafted him, and he's been in the Astros organization his whole life until right now. So, sure, if Tom Ricketts wants to throw $500 million at him in mid-July, I bet Kyle Tucker would listen. But short of that, I don't think it's rational to expect them to have a legit contract extension talks.
Yeah, that's our guy, irrational Cody.
Listen, a guy likes to dream, all right?
Yeah, it seems unlikely that they'll get a deal done before he hits free agency. Now, whether or not they go against everything the Cubs have ever shown us in the last 10 years and actually offer a guy $450 million, that remains to be seen. So you were on this deal and this possibility as early as anybody. You might have been the earliest. If you were, congratulations. I ask this. You said Cam Smith becomes their number one prospect. So people here worry right away. They're like, Cam Smith, he was going to be our third baseman in the future. He was the number one pick. Yada, yada, yada. That's great. But he wasn't, as you mentioned, not one of their he wasn't their top prospect. He wasn't their second prospect. He wasn't their third prospect. Who were the other names that you heard either being tossed around? Because I think when Cubs fans hear some of the other names potentially, that they might say, all right, well, Cam Smith could turn out to be a star, but you know what? This is the price of having a really great player, even if it is for just 1 year.
Yeah, I'm not gonna sit here and say I know every trade permutation that was thrown out there, that I know every kind of name that was discussed. Ken Rosenthal and I reported during the winter meetings that the Astros, they asked for Seiya Suzuki or Isaac Paredes. And look, the Astros have loved Isaac Paredes for almost 2 years now. They tried really hard to acquire him at the trade deadline last year, and the Cubs just outbid them at the end. But Cam Smith was a guy that early on was like, he was the guy that a lot of Astros people were talking about right off. It's like, oh, this guy. They were circling him. And then the Paredes thing made a ton of sense because like we've talked about, they were really in on him at the last deadline. They're probably going to need a third baseman here coming up. And he profiles very, very well for Minute Maid Park with his dead pull approach. And then, Wisniewski, I didn't really hear a ton of the pitchers that were being talked about or exchanging names being exchanged, but one thing about the Astros that they're really good at, and I mean, you saw it last year with Yusei Kikuchi, you've seen it time and time again, is they seem to take pitchers that are average to below average, that have struggled, that have scuffled, and they seem to find a way to unlock them, whether it's, usage patterns, whether it's where they're throwing pitches, whether it's mechanics, things like that. They have some voodoo about them that they can get that done. So it was kind of funny when they were talking about, oh, there's going to be a pitcher included. I was just kind of like, at this point, you could tell me whoever, and I would probably, put my faith in the Astros pitching development infrastructure to find a way to make them serviceable. And then it's a nice little story with Hayden Wisniewski, who Houston native, Houston guy, lives in the Woodlands, which is a suburb about 20 miles outside of Houston. He actually Zoomed with us from the Woodlands on the day the trade went down. He was playing golf in the Woodlands when I think Jed called him and told him. So he seems pretty fired up to be home, which is a cool story. But yeah, I mean, Suzuki was the other big name, but Jed made that, or seemed to make that pretty clear at the winter meetings, that they weren't entertaining moving him.
Yeah. Going back to Tucker, like obviously the stats and the numbers and the on the field stuff is like, it looks like a massive addition to the Cubs. I'm also curious about the off the field stuff, as far as, like, you mentioned, he met Michael Brantley in Houston and they're like best friends, and Michael Brantley showed him kind of how to be a big leaguer. He went into the locker room that already had Altuve and Correa and all those guys. I'm curious where he's at in that part of his career, as far as, like, now he's the veteran guy. He's done a lot of winning. Like, what does he bring off the field in a locker room sense, for especially for the Cubs, who do have a lot of young guys who have yet to kind of either get a lot of major league experience or just have a lot of experience winning at the big league level?
I say this with the caveat that you can lead in a lot of different ways, that you don't have to be the vocal guy. I mean, Michael Brantley was the opposite of a vocal guy. He just kind of led by example. The Astros have a lot of that in their clubhouse. It's not a real vocal team, not a bunch of guys are going to call team meetings and air people out. With that being said, Kyle Tucker, the last adjective I'd use to describe him is vocal. He's pretty quiet, pretty to himself. He lets his personality come out when the media is not around. He lets his personality come out kind of behind closed doors, or like if you're on a backfield in spring training, you kind of see him he's really funny, but you'll probably never see any of it kind of show itself publicly. He's always just kind of been a quiet guy, not a ton of flash with him. He's kind of one of those guys, hits a home run, you may get a little bit of a bat flip, but nothing major. Makes a diving play, he's just going to get up and run to the dugout. There were times early on in his career when he struggled, because when he came up to the big leagues, it was a struggle for him first kind of 150 plate appearances. There were fans that wondered, like, does this guy care? Because not even just because of his personality. This is not a guy that's going to look like he's like, nothing he does looks difficult. He's just one of these guys that it's very smooth for him. Like, everything to him comes pretty naturally and pretty easy. And he won't argue. I think he's been ejected once in his career. He will not be the guy that's going to wear a ton of bling on the field, not going to be the most vocal guy, the look at me kind of guy. But that doesn't mean he can't be a leader. Mm-hmm. He was in a clubhouse in Houston where they had a pretty entrenched culture. They had a pretty entrenched leadership group of, it was Martin Maldonado at one point. It was Hector Neris at one point. It was Michael Brantley at one point. It was, Jose Altuve is just kind of the guy that everyone kind of looks up to. He's not a vocal guy. Alex Bregman kind of overtook the leadership role last year. So Kyle Tucker's never really had to be like the guy. He's never had to be the focus of a clubhouse, the focus of a lineup, things like that. He's always had a pretty veteran supporting cast around him. So I'll be interested to see actually kind of how he ingratiates himself into that Cubs clubhouse and kind of how he goes about that. He does have one friend in there. I know that him and Nate Pearson are both from Florida. They train together in the off season. I know that they're pretty tight friends. So at least he's got one guy that he knows pretty well walking in there. And who knows, maybe if Tom Ricketts wants to unleash the purse strings, maybe he could have a certain third baseman that he's played with for a while.
Ooh, yeah, I like that idea.
Throwing that out there.
Chandler, great job on the story. We appreciate you joining us, because this is the most exciting thing that has happened to Cubs fans. Even if it's just for 1 year, it's the most exciting thing that has happened in at least 3 years.
At least since we launched, yeah. Probably.
Oh, yeah. It's not even close. So we appreciate you joining us. Have a great off season. Have a great holiday season, and keep up the great work at The Athletic.
All right. Thanks, guys. I appreciate you having me.
We all silly like the mayor.